She stood at the sink longer than necessary, her hands resting in the lukewarm water, fingers barely moving against the smooth surface of a plate that was already clean. The kitchen window was slightly open, just enough to let in a thin line of air that carried the distant sound of a passing car. It faded quickly. Everything did these days. She set the plate on the rack with care, aligning it beside the others as if it mattered. The clock on the wall ticked in a steady, patient rhythm. Not loud. Just present, it filled the room in a way nothing else did. The coffee had gone cold. She noticed it when she picked up the mug and felt the absence of warmth. She drank it anyway. There wasn't much reason not to. Her mornings followed a pattern that didn't require thinking. Wake up just before 7, sit on the edge of the bed for a minute or two, letting the quiet settle around her before standing. The floor always felt colder than expected. She never adjusted to that. She made coffee the same way every day, measured the grounds without looking, filled the water just below the line, though she wasn't sure why that line existed. It had never made a difference she could notice. Then she sat at the small table by the window. Some mornings she looked outside. Other mornings she didn't. It depended on how heavy the silence felt. The house held onto things, not in a visible way. There weren't stacks of old papers or cluttered corners. She had kept it tidy, even after it became just hers. But the rooms carried something else. A kind of stillness that didn't leave when she moved through them. In the living room, the chair near the lamp remained slightly angled, as if someone had just stood up and might return. She had tried moving it once. It looked wrong. She moved it back. The television stayed off most days. The sound felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. When she did turn it on, it was usually low, just enough to break the silence without replacing it. She finished her coffee and rinsed the mug, placing it upside down beside the sink. One cup, one plate, one set of utensils. It hadn't always been that way, but she didn't think about that in the mornings. Thinking too early made the day feel longer. By 8:30, she had already walked through most of the house. Not intentionally. Just passing from one room to another, adjusting small things that didn't need adjusting. Straightening a folded blanket, wiping a counter that was already clean, opening and closing drawers. Movement helped. At 9, she put on her coat. It was the same coat she had worn for years, soft at the edges, familiar in the way it settled on her shoulders. The weather didn't matter much. The walk did. The path she took wasn't long. Just a few blocks past houses that looked similar enough to blur together if she didn't pay attention. Some had small decorations on their porches, wind chimes, seasonal wreaths that stayed up longer than intended. She noticed those things. There was a dog that barked from behind a fence on the second street. Always the same sharp, repetitive sound. She used to find it irritating. Now it felt like a marker, something that confirmed she was exactly where she expected to be. Routine had a way of doing that. Kept things in place. At the corner, she paused briefly before crossing, even when there were no cars. The habit remained steady and unquestioned. The small grocery store sat another block ahead. It wasn't large, and it hadn't changed much over the years. The sign above the door had faded slightly, but the letters were still readable. Inside, the air was cooler. The lights were bright but not harsh. She picked up a basket, though she rarely needed it. She walked the same aisles in the same order. Produce first. Even if she didn't plan to buy anything there, she liked looking at it. The colors felt different from the rest of the store, less muted, then bread, then canned goods. She took her time, reading labels she had already read before. It wasn't about choosing, it was about being there a little longer. At the checkout, the young cashier nodded politely. They had spoken a few times, brief exchanges about the weather or how quiet it had been that day. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied. He scanned her items, a small bag, nothing unusual. Paper or plastic? Paper is fine. She paid in cash, exact change when she had it. There was something steady about counting it out, placing the bills and coins on the counter one by one. "Have a good day," he said. "You too." The bell above the door chimed softly as she left. Outside, the air felt slightly warmer than before, or maybe she just noticed it more after being inside. She adjusted the bag in her hand and began the walk back. It was on that return, somewhere between the second street and her own, that she saw him. He was sitting on the curb, not directly in front of any house, just in that space between properties where the sidewalk widened slightly. His posture was still, shoulders slightly hunched, hands resting loosely in his lap. There was a bag beside him, not large, worn at the edges. She didn't slow down at first. People sat outside sometimes. It wasn't unusual. But as she got closer, she noticed the way he wasn't looking at anything in particular. His eyes moved, but not with focus. More like he was waiting without expecting anything to happen. She passed him, Her steps remained steady, measured, the same as always. The sound of her shoes against the pavement continued, soft and consistent. A few seconds went by, then she stopped. It wasn't a dramatic pause, no sudden realization, just a slight hesitation that extended longer than usual. She turned her head just enough to look back. He hadn't moved. The bag was still at his side, his hands still resting the same way. There was something about the stillness, not empty, just quiet in a way that felt familiar. She looked forward again. Her house was only a short distance away now. She could see the edge of the roof through the trees. Everything was exactly where it should be. She stood there a moment longer. Then, without fully deciding, she turned around. Her steps were slower this time, not out of uncertainty, but because she was paying attention now, to him, to the space, to the way the morning felt slightly different. When she reached him, she stopped a few feet away. He looked up, not startled, just aware. "Morning," she said. Her voice sounded the same as it always did. Calm, even. "Morning," he replied. There was a brief silence, not uncomfortable, just present. She shifted the bag in her hand. "I just came from the store," she said. "I bought more than I needed." It wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't entirely untrue either. He nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the statement without questioning it. She opened the paper bag and took out a loaf of bread, then hesitated before adding a small container of soup she had picked up without much thought. "I thought maybe you could use this." She held it out, not too close, giving him space to accept or decline. He looked at the items, then back at her. "Thank you," he said. His voice was quiet. Not weak, just measured. He took the food carefully, placing it beside him. She nodded once. "You're welcome." There wasn't much else to say. She stood there a second longer than necessary, then turned and continued walking. This time, the sound of her steps felt slightly different, not louder, just noticed. When she reached her house, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was the same as when she left. Still, familiar. She set the remaining items on the counter and removed her coat, hanging it in its usual place. For a moment, she stood in the kitchen without moving. Then she walked to the window. From there, she couldn't see the corner where he sat. It was just out of view, hidden by the angle of the street. She knew he was still there, or maybe he was. She didn't check. Instead, she turned back to the sink, picked up a clean dish, and ran water over it again. The clock continued its steady ticking. But something, just slightly, had shifted. Not enough to name, not enough to understand, just enough to notice. The afternoon settled in without much announcement. Light shifted slowly across the kitchen floor, stretching toward the far wall, then thinning out as clouds moved in. She noticed it the way she noticed most things, quietly, without reacting. She ate her lunch standing by the counter. A small plate, half a sandwich she didn't finish. The other half remained there for a while before she wrapped it and placed it in the refrigerator, though she knew she wouldn't come back to it. There was no particular reason to sit. The chair by the table remained where it always was. She glanced at it once, then looked away. Afterward, she rinsed the plate and dried it immediately, placing it back in the cabinet. The space inside looked unchanged, though it had been rearranged many times over the years. Fewer dishes now, more room than necessary. She walked into the living room and paused. Nothing had moved, the same chair, the same lamp, the same faint crease in the cushion that never fully disappeared. She reached for the remote, held it for a moment, then set it back down. Silence felt easier to manage than noise that didn't mean anything. Instead, she moved toward the hallway. The carpet there held a slightly darker path, worn gently over time. Her steps followed it without thinking. They always did. The bedroom door was open. It stayed that way now. Closing it made the space feel too contained, like something was being kept inside that shouldn't be. She stepped in, not to do anything specific, just to be there for a moment. The bed was made. It always was. The blanket pulled smooth, corners tucked just enough to hold shape. 2 pillows rested at the head, though only one was used. She adjusted the second pillow slightly, then stopped. It didn't need adjusting. Her hand lingered there a second before she let it fall to her side. The dresser across the room held a few framed photographs. She didn't walk over to them. Not today. Some days she did. Today didn't feel like one of them. She left the room the same way she had entered, without a clear reason. Back in the hallway, she paused again, then continued toward the front of the house. The window near the door gave a partial view of the street. Not the corner, just the stretch leading up to it. She stood there longer than she expected to. Nothing unusual passed by. A car, then another. A woman walking a dog. The dog stopped once, then moved on. She shifted her weight slightly, her hand resting against the frame of the window. The thought came quietly. She hadn't asked his name. It didn't feel like something she needed to know at the time. The moment hadn't asked for it. Still, now that she was standing there, it lingered. Not heavily, just present. She stepped back from the window. The house returned to its usual stillness. By late afternoon, she found herself back in the kitchen. Not because she was hungry, but because it was where she went when there was nothing else to do. The familiar surfaces, the quiet hum of the refrigerator, the predictable layout, it all required less from her. She opened the cabinet, then closed it. Opened the refrigerator, looked inside, then closed it again. There was enough food. There always was. She filled a glass with water and took a few small sips, then set it down without finishing it. Her eyes moved toward the clock. It wasn't time for anything in particular. Still, she reached for her coat. This time, she hesitated. Her hand rested on the fabric for a moment before she pulled it down from the hook. She put it on slowly, smoothing the front as if preparing for something more than a short walk. When she stepped outside, the air had cooled slightly. The kind of cool that came late in the day, soft and steady. She closed the door behind her and began walking. The path was the same. The house is unchanged. The dog behind the fence barked again, though not as sharply as in the morning. At the corner, she slowed. He was still there, in the same spot, the bag beside him, his posture unchanged, though his head was slightly turned now, watching something farther down the street. She didn't stop immediately this time. She walked past him once just as she had before. Then, a few steps later, she turned back. "Hello again," she said. He looked up, recognizing her without surprise. "Hello." His voice held the same steady tone. She nodded, then glanced briefly at the bag beside him. "Did you get a chance to eat?" It wasn't a necessary question. She could see that the bread was partly gone, the container empty. "Yes," he said. "Thank you." She gave a small nod. "That's good." A pause followed. She shifted slightly, her hands resting in the pockets of her coat. "I realized I didn't ask your name earlier." He adjusted his position just enough to face her more directly. "Daniel," he said. She repeated it quietly, more to herself than to him. "Daniel," he gave a small nod. "And yours?" She hesitated for a brief second. "Margaret." It had been said out loud before, of course, at the store, occasionally on the phone, but here, in this moment, it felt different, not unfamiliar, just placed somewhere new. "Nice to meet you, Margaret," he said. "You too." The words settled between them, simple and complete. A car passed behind her. She stepped slightly to the side without looking. "Do stay here?" she asked after a moment. He glanced down the street, then back at her. "Sometimes," he said. She nodded, accepting the answer as it was. There didn't seem to be more to ask. "I walk this way most days," she said. "In the morning." He listened without interrupting. "And in the afternoon sometimes." Another small pause. He gave a slight nod. "I'll probably be here." The statement wasn't firm, just an observation. She took that in, then looked down briefly at the ground near her feet. "I can bring something tomorrow," she said, almost as an afterthought. "You don't have to." "I know," the response came easily, "but I can." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. "All right." There was nothing else that needed to be said. She gave a small nod in return, then turned and continued walking. This time, she didn't go far. Just to the end of the block, then back again. He remained there as she passed, though they didn't speak a second time. When she reached her house, she paused at the door, her hand resting on the handle. The quiet inside felt slightly different now, not changed exactly, just interrupted. She stepped in and closed the door behind her. Her coat went back on the hook, her shoes placed in their usual spot. Everything returned to its place. But the rhythm of the day had shifted just enough to be noticed. That evening, she prepared a simple meal. Soup warmed slowly on the stove. She watched it more than necessary, stirring occasionally even when it didn't need stirring. She poured it into a bowl and carried it to the table. This time, she sat. The chair felt the same. The table unchanged. She ate slowly, pausing between bites without thinking. Her eyes moved once toward the empty chair across from her. She didn't linger there long. After finishing, she left the bowl on the table for a few minutes before taking it back to the sink. The water ran. The dish was cleaned. Placed back where it belonged, the clock continued its steady ticking. Later, in the living room, she turned on the lamp without turning on the television. The light filled the space softly. She sat in the chair across from the one that remained slightly angled. Her hands rested in her lap. She didn't think about much, not in words at least. But the image of the corner stayed with her. The curb, the bag, the way he had said her name, Margaret, it had sounded the same as always, and not the same at all. When she went to bed, the routine followed its usual path. Lights off, door open. Blanket pulled to the same place. She lay on her side, facing the wall. Sleep didn't come immediately. It rarely did. But the quiet felt different now. Not fuller, just less empty. The next morning began the same way it always did. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, her feet resting lightly against the floor before she stood. The room held that familiar early quiet, the kind that made even small movements feel noticeable. She reached for her robe, slipped it on, and moved toward the kitchen without turning on any lights. The coffee maker clicked on with a soft, routine sound. She stood beside it, waiting, not because she needed to, but because she always had. Steam rose in thin, quiet lines. The smell filled the room slowly, steady, and expected. She poured a cup before it finished brewing, something she had started doing years ago and never stopped. At the table, she sat in her usual chair. The window was slightly fogged from the difference in temperature. She reached out with her fingers and cleared a small space, just enough to see through. The street looked the same. Nothing had changed. Still, she watched a little longer than usual. Her coffee cooled faster than she realized. She drank it anyway. Afterward, she stood at the sink, rinsing the cup with the same measured care. The water ran over her hands, warm and steady. She dried the mug and placed it back in the cabinet, aligning it with the others. Then she paused. Her hand rested briefly on the cabinet door before she closed it. She looked toward the counter. There was nothing different there, nothing out of place. But she remained still for a moment, as if something hadn't quite settled. Then she turned, walked to the hallway, and followed her usual path through the house. The living room remained unchanged. The chair still angled slightly, the lamp untouched. She stopped near the window, her gaze drifting toward the part of the street she could see. It didn't reach the corner, not quite. She stood there longer than she needed to, then she moved away. At 9, she reached for her coat. This time, there was no hesitation. The fabric settled over her shoulders with the same familiar weight. She adjusted the collar, then stepped outside, closing the door behind her. The air was cooler than the day before. A faint breeze moved along the street, shifting a few loose leaves across the pavement. She began walking. The path remained the same. The houses, the small details, the dog behind the fence, it all followed its usual pattern. But her attention felt slightly different, more directed. At the corner, she slowed before she reached it. He was there. Daniel sat in the same place, though his posture had shifted slightly. He leaned back a bit more, one hand resting on the ground beside him, the other loosely over his knee. The bag remained at his side. She approached without passing him this time. "Good morning," she said. He looked up, then gave a small nod. "Morning." She stood a few feet away, her hands resting lightly at her sides. "I brought something," she said. From her coat pocket, she took out a small wrapped package. Wasn't much, just a sandwich she had prepared before leaving, wrapped carefully in paper. She held it out toward him. He accepted it with the same quiet care as before. "Thank you. You're welcome." He unwrapped part of it, glancing down briefly, then back up at her. "You made this?" "Yes," he nodded once. There was a pause, not empty, just unhurried. She shifted her weight slightly, then looked down the street before returning her gaze to him. "It's colder today," she said. "A little," he replied. He took a small bite, chewing slowly. She noticed the way he didn't rush, the way he ate as if there was no need to hurry through anything. She found herself standing there longer than she had intended. "I usually walk a bit farther," she said, almost as if explaining her presence. He nodded. "I'll be here." The words came easily, without emphasis. She gave a small nod in return. "All right." But she didn't leave immediately. Instead, she stepped slightly closer, not enough to close the space entirely, just enough to feel less like she was passing through. "Do you need anything else?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, this is enough." She looked at the sandwich again, then back at him. "Okay." Another pause, the kind that might have felt awkward once but didn't now. "I used to walk this route with my husband," she said, the words arriving without much thought. Daniel didn't interrupt. "We didn't talk much," she continued. "Not on the walks," he listened. "But it felt full anyway." She stopped there. There was no need to add more. He nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. "I understand," he said. She looked at him for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Yes." The breeze picked up slightly, moving a few strands of her hair across her face. She brushed them back without thinking. "I should keep walking," she said. He didn't respond immediately, just finished his bite, then looked up again. "I'll be here later," she nodded. "All right." This time, she turned and continued down the street. Her steps felt steady but different, not faster, just more aware. She walked a little farther than usual before turning back. When she passed the corner again, he was still there. They didn't speak. She gave a small nod. He returned it, and she continued home. Inside, the house felt the same, but she moved through it differently. Not faster, not slower, just with a slight shift in attention. In the kitchen, she placed her coat on the hook, then stood for a moment with her hand still resting on it. The room held its usual quiet. but it didn't press in the same way. She walked to the counter and began preparing another sandwich, not out of habit, not out of necessity, just because. The motions felt familiar. Bread, knife, the small details she had repeated for years. But this time, there was a direction to it. When she finished, she wrapped it carefully and placed it in the refrigerator. Then she stepped back. The kitchen looked the same, everything in its place, but something about the act remained with her. Not the sandwich itself, just the reason for it. The rest of the day unfolded quietly. She moved through her routine as she always did, cleaning, adjusting, walking from room to room without urgency. But there were small interruptions now. Moments where her attention shifted toward the corner, toward the space outside her usual path. In the afternoon, she found herself standing by the window again. This time she stayed longer. The view didn't change, but her focus did. She wasn't just looking. She was waiting, not for anything specific, just noticing. When she finally stepped away, the room didn't feel as still as it had before. It held something else now, not noise, not fullness, just presence. That evening she prepared her meal with the same quiet care. Soup again. Bread. Simple. She carried it to the table and sat down. This time she didn't glance at the empty chair. She kept her focus on the bowl in front of her. But the absence felt different, less defined. After she finished, she remained seated for a while, her hands resting lightly on the table, the clock ticking steadily in the background. She didn't move to clean up right away. There was no need to rush. Eventually, she stood, carried the bowl to the sink, and washed it as she always did. The routine continued, but something within it had shifted, not in a way she could name. Not in a way that required understanding, just in a way that made the space feel slightly less fixed. Later, as she sat in the living room with the lamp on, she noticed the chair again, the angle, the space beside it. She considered moving it, just slightly. Her hand rested on the back of it. Then she stopped. It didn't feel necessary, not anymore. She let her hand fall away, and sat down. The quiet remained, but it no longer felt like something she had to move through alone. The next few days did not announce themselves as different. They arrived the same way mornings always had, quiet, steady, without asking for attention. The clock kept its rhythm. The coffee brewed. The light shifted slowly across the same surfaces. Margaret followed her routine. She woke before 7, sat at the edge of the bed, let her feet rest on the floor before standing. The small pause remained, though it no longer felt like something she had to get through. In the kitchen, she made her coffee, measured without looking. Poured before it finished brewing, sat at the table. The window was clearer now. The weather had changed slightly, the air less sharp in the mornings. She didn't wipe the glass this time. She didn't need to, she could see enough. The street was still, but it didn't feel empty. She finished her coffee, rinsed the cup, and placed it back in the cabinet. One cup. Still one, but it didn't carry the same weight. At 9, she put on her coat. The motion came easily. Outside, the air held a quiet warmth, not strong enough to notice all at once, but present if she stood still for a moment. She didn't stand still. She walked. The same path, the same houses, the same small details that had once blended together. Now she noticed them differently, not more intensely, just more clearly. The dog behind the fence barked again, then stopped sooner than usual. She glanced toward it briefly, then continued. At the corner, she slowed. Daniel was there. Not in exactly the same position, but close enough that it felt familiar. The bag still rested beside him, his posture slightly adjusted as it always was. She approached without hesitation. "Good morning," she said. He looked up and gave a small nod. "Morning." She reached into her coat pocket and took out the sandwich she had prepared earlier. "I brought this," she said. He accepted it. "Thank you. You're welcome." He unwrapped it carefully, as he always did, not rushing, not delaying. She stood nearby, not waiting for anything in particular, just standing. After a moment, she lowered herself slightly and sat on the edge of the curb, leaving enough space between them. The ground was cool. She placed her hands in her lap. For a while, neither of them spoke. Cars passed occasionally. The sound came and went. A door closed somewhere down the street. A voice carried briefly, then disappeared. The quiet returned. "Do you walk every day?" Daniel asked. She looked ahead. "Yes," he nodded. "Same time, most days." Another small pause. "I used to," he said. She turned her head slightly. "Walk," he nodded. "Every morning, same route." She waited. "Got used to it," he added. She gave a small nod. "It helps," she said. He didn't respond right away. Then quietly, "It does." They sat there for a while longer, not speaking, not needing to. The space between them didn't feel uncertain. It felt settled. After some time, she stood. "I'll come by later," she said. He looked up. "I'll be here." She nodded once and continued walking. The rest of her route felt the same, But she didn't measure it the way she used to, she didn't count the blocks. She didn't notice the time, she just walked. When she returned home, the house met her in its usual way. Still, familiar. She removed her coat, placed it on the hook, and stepped into the kitchen. The counter was clear, the sink empty, everything in its place. She stood there for a moment. Then moved to the cabinet, took out a plate, and set it on the table. She didn't eat right away, she sat first. That had become something she did now, not every time, but more often. She placed her hands on the table, fingers resting lightly against the surface. The chair across from her remained empty, but it no longer felt like something that needed to be filled. It was just there. Later in the afternoon, she returned to the window. The same place, the same view. But she didn't stand as long this time. She didn't need to. Instead, she put on her coat again and stepped outside. The walk felt different in the afternoon. Slower, quieter, the light softer. At the corner, Daniel was still there. She approached and gave a small nod. He returned it. "I brought some soup," she said, holding out a small container. He accepted it. "Thank you." She sat again, this time without hesitation. The curb felt less unfamiliar now. They spoke a little. Not much, small things. The weather, the way the street had been quieter lately, how the store had changed its layout slightly. None of it felt important, but none of it felt unnecessary either. At one point, she found herself mentioning the chair in her living room. "The one by the lamp," she said. "It's been in the same place for years." He listened. "I thought about moving it," she added. "Did you?" he asked. She shook her head. "No," a small pause. "Didn't feel right." He nodded. "Some things don't." She looked down at her hands. Then back up. "Yes." They sat in silence again, but it was not the same silence she had known before. It didn't stretch, it didn't press. It simply existed. After a while she stood. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. He gave a small nod. "I'll be here." She walked home. Inside, the house greeted her the same way, but she moved through it with a quiet ease. In the living room, she paused near the chair again. Her hand rested on the back of it. This time, she adjusted it, just slightly. Not enough to change its place, just enough to change its angle. She stepped back, looked at it, then nodded once almost to herself. That evening she prepared her meal. Soup again, bread, simple. She carried it to the table and sat. She ate slowly, not out of habit, just because there was no reason not to. Afterward, she cleaned the dishes, dried them, and placed them back where they belonged. The clock continued its steady ticking. Later, she turned on the lamp in the living room and sat down. The chair felt the same, the room looked the same, but something within it had shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, just quietly. The days continued like that, morning walks, afternoon visits, small conversations, long pauses, nothing that would stand out, nothing that would draw attention, but something that remained. One morning, as she stood at the window with her coffee, she realized she was no longer waiting for the day to pass. She was noticing it, the way the light moved, the way the street sounded, the way her steps felt when she walked. She finished her coffee and set the mug in the sink. She didn't rinse it right away. Instead, she reached for her coat. The air outside felt familiar, not new, not different, just known. At the corner, Daniel was there. She approached. "Good morning," she said. "Morning." She sat beside him. They didn't speak right away. They didn't need to. After a while, she said, "I used to think the days were all the same." He looked ahead. "They can be," he said. She nodded. "But they're not," she added. He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. They sat there for a while longer. The street moved around them in quiet ways. Cars passing, voices fading, leaves shifting along the pavement. Margaret placed her hands in her lap and looked ahead. Nothing had changed in any obvious way. The house was the same. The routine was still there. The rooms still held their quiet. But something had moved, not outside, inside, gently, without asking, without announcing itself, just enough. She stood after a while. "I'll see you later," she said. Daniel nodded. "I'll be here." She began walking. The path was the same, the houses unchanged. The dog behind the fence barked once, then stopped. She continued, her steps steady, her pace unhurried. At her door, she paused briefly before going inside. The house waited as it always had. She opened the door, stepped in, closed it behind her. The quiet met her, but it no longer felt like something she had to carry. She walked to the kitchen, set her things down, and stood for a moment without moving. Then she turned toward the living room. The chair by the lamp sat at its slight new angle. She looked at it, not for long, just enough. Then she moved past it and sat down. The light filled the room softly. The clock continued its steady rhythm. Outside, the day moved forward. Inside, so did she.